Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the podcast. I'm Adrian Lloyd. This is just my stupid opinion. All right, so we got a couple different things I want to get into today. And I think the first good story to start off with is talking about for a while now in Canada, we've been having a little bit of worry when it comes to trade with America because, we've had the NAFTA renegotiations. And then recently, people have started, within the last few weeks, Trump was starting to talk about how he wanted to put a tariff on aluminum. He wanted to put a trade on aluminum and steel from Canada and Mexico, and then he was also expressing interest in the rest of the world. Well, he recently just dropped that. And as you know, there's been a lot of desperation on both Canada and Mexico's side. We finally figure out that Canada is spared, as is Mexico. This sort of tariff is being dropped on the rest of the world. So we should consider ourselves, we could breathe a little bit easier because now we know that we're still having more of a free trade in that regards. Now, I actually thought this was interesting, as I saw that once I saw that he was willing to spare Canada and Mexico, I began looking at this trade tariff from a different perspective before I just took it pretty more or less as it seemed. It was just Trump taking aim at our taxes, at our steel, at our industry. However, after I realized this and he was willing to let Canada off, I actually began thinking about this from another perspective. See, one thing that's always resonated me with Trump is that Trump can be very brash and he can be kind of dumb. But one thing about him that I always found was true was that he is good at the art of persuasion. And this is actually a theory that was started by Scott Adams, the Dilbert creator. He's talked a lot about how Trump is a man about persuasion, how he's very good at persuasion. And I've kind of noticed that in Trump. He definitely is good at persuasion. I mean, you can't deny that for the way that he ran the 2016 election. He got a lot of people on his side that normally wouldn't go Republican. He got a lot of black people on his side. He got a lot of Hispanics on his side. So he definitely pulled in, he even pulled in a pretty high number of the, I think, LGBT vote. So Trump is definitely good at persuasion. So when I was looking at this more, couldn't help but think that this was actually Canada and Mexico were actually distractions. See, the one thing that Canada definitely was a little confused about by this is that we're not huge buyers of American steel. While there is a trade deficit between our two countries, all in all, it's not like we're their biggest market for the steel. However, one of the biggest concerns for a while amongst North America has been China. A lot of people have been concerned about China putting their metals into North America, sort of watering down the industry here, taking advantage of North American trade. So that has been one of the big concerns. At least up here in Canada has been one of the concerns, and I think this is actually what was Trump's main concern. But he couldn't just outright put this sort of tariff on China without repercussions. If he just turned to China, it's not like America and Canada have the greatest relations with China, he just says, I'm putting a tariff on your metals, then that would not go over well and would probably start a trade war with China. So what did he do? He distracted China and the rest of the world by looking like he was starting a trade war with Canada. But he said, at first it was, Canadians and Mexicans, we need to focus on their metal. You know what, all in all, we got to put this on the rest of the world. We need to make sure that all our industry is protected. So we need to put this tariff on the rest of the world. That's what Trump is saying. And then in the end, the first people that he's initially attacking in this situation, he completely says, you're good for now. As the headline here says Canada is spared from Trump's tariffs for now. But the real reason he did this, it was so he could put those tariffs on China. But again, couldn't do it directly. So this was all sleight of hand that Trump has been doing. This is exactly what I believe it is. And it's I actually think it's for good means, because the one thing we can't that we need to remember is that China is a communist dictatorship, and they have control of the industry. The Chinese government has control of the industry. So whenever China, we're making trades and deals with China, we're not dealing with the independent companies, the independent people there, but they are representatives of China themselves. And in a lot of ways, these businessmen are a way to spread Chinese influence. We actually saw something similar to this when Trudeau was he was meeting up with some Chinese businessmen, and then they made a big donation to the Trudeau Foundation, and I think it was the University of Montreal, if I remember correctly, and it caused a big stir. It caused a big stir with people because they were saying that these sort of businessmen that Trudeau was getting in bed with, these were the type of people that were known to go out and try and spread Chinese influence. And the fact that they're making a big donation to one of our universities, it seems to me that they are, if anything, just helping to further the Marxist ideology that is on university campuses these days. And in fact, from the Chinese perspective, this is the sort of thing they want. And I think the reason that China is sort of butting up to Canada right now is the fact that Canada's going so left-wing. They're trying to pull Canada under its influence. And they would like to pull other countries under their influence. Absolutely, they would like to gain the influence over America. But I think that is one thing, this is what China is planning right now. They're trying to win over Canada's influence over America. And that way we'll side a little bit more with them. And never a better time to try it than now. Since Justin Trudeau got into office, because when his father was in office, Pierre Elliott Trudeau, we can argue about whether it's Fidel Castro all day, but for the record, we're going with Pierre Elliott Trudeau. And he showed great sympathy for communist dictatorships, for China, for Soviet Union, for Cuba. He spoke highly of them many times. He sided with Russia many times over America. He was one of the first people to open up, in the West, to open up diplomatic ties with China during the Cold War. So it's clear that for Trudeau's case, Justin Trudeau, he's very similar to his father. So it seems never before is there really a more appropriate time than right now for them to try and gain Canada's influence. Trudeau is completely open to Chinese influence. In fact, that's probably something that he would like to see. I see no reason that he's spoken highly of their dictatorship before in the past, and I see no reason now that he would ever shy away from China. But in the end, this is what their tariff was about. Trump has done this in a few different times. A few different times he's gone one way. He goes left when he's trying to actually go right. But it's all about it's all about tricking people to get him to do what he wants. This is actually a perfect example of that. I'm sure there's many out there who would probably disagree with me, but I don't really know how you explain much of Trump's actions out of this, aside from the fact that maybe he was being brash. Or brash. I think I said brass. I meant brash. But the way I look at it, I don't really think Trump's a smarter man than that. He's a lot smarter than the mainstream media gives him credit for. And he had to be in order to win the presidential nomination. And he's for the most part, has kept his core base. Although he definitely made some piss-off moves with that, with the gunman when he was talking about. Although many others have seen that as him trying to play both sides. I know there's a couple gun advocates that I know that have not taken it quite as badly as I thought they would. Although still many are taking it badly, him even proposing the gun ban in the due process. They're not taking that very well. So one thing that I did like to see is that Andrew Scheer ended up making a trip to London recently, and this has laying the groundwork for a Canada-UK trade agreement. However, at the same time, he ended up making a focus on India. See, Andrew Scheer, with everything that I was talking about with China right now, especially with their trade, he wants Canada to reject free trade with China, and he wants us to refocus our attention with places such as India. In fact, India is one of the main places that he's trying to set up the groundworks for a free trade agreement in the future. I really think what he's doing is he's trying to scramble together what's left of the free trade agreement that was being put in place by Stephen Harper that Trudeau kind of stomped all over. And then for those who ended up watching the conversation I had with Arjun, he ended up explaining that in the end, Trudeau had pissed off the Indian government so much that there was nothing that Trudeau could do. He had no hand in the bargaining, so he had to take whatever deal he could get. And he still tries to brag about this. So Scheer is trying to do damage control. He's trying to meet up with the Indian representatives, and he's trying to make sure that when the Conservatives win a government in 2019, right now it actually looks that way. After the India trip was detrimental for Trudeau's ratings, they've fallen. Right now, Andrew Scheer would win with a few points over Justin Trudeau by like. I think they're sitting at 39%, and Trudeau's sitting at something like 34% if they were to go to election now. And this is something we need to see, because Canada and India has a long history. Of course, our history is intertwined because we're both part of the British Confederation. We both have our roots there. But India is strong in its belief in democracy. So if we are going to make our free trades, why not make our free trades with people who have been who are allies, who have been allies in the past, and are still are allies today, even though Trudeau pissed the hell out of them. They're still willing to give Canada a second chance for everything I say. They don't equivalate what Trudeau is with the rest of Canada. They know that Canada is better than that. So they're willing to still go in with us. And this is what Andrew Scheer is trying to do. He's trying to lay the groundworks that would salvage this whole thing. Once again, once we're talking about a deal with India, we're not having to worry about foreign influence in the same way that we have to do with China. And right now, we really have to be careful for how left-wing Canada is going, for how mired in the cultural Marxism that it is. And that budget that was released was a more socialist budget. It was all about equality. It had nothing to do that was going to build us up for the future, or that was really investing in our future. They were relying on bullshit numbers in order to push their narrative. In fact, if anything, I think Trudeau is just once again playing damage control. He's trying to buy his votes with that budget by appealing to women, by appealing to minority groups. So that's a couple of the quick stories that we have out of the way. Now, we're having a problem here in Ontario right now in terms of our election that's coming up, because we're just a couple days away. I'm filming this on the 8th of March, so we are about 2 days away from the announcement of who the new progressive conservative leadership is going to be. Now, we're having a lot of problems right now because there's a lot of people who have not received their membership on time. They pushed back the date to March 5th, and I may have actually seen something that they may have even pushed the date back again to March 8th in the deadline for when you could register to vote for this election. Now, I got mine and I managed to go online, and I voted. But there's plenty of people out there, they're saying thousands of new members who are not, and some old members too, who are not receiving their information in time to vote. And also, the other thing that's concerning about this is that we are doing this on online. This is an online vote. This makes me really nervous. I don't trust the PC leadership, Vic Fedeli and the rest. We're already seeing problems in this regard. We see a strong push to see someone like Caroline Mulroney or Christine Elliott, one of the more establishment politicians, to take charge in this. And then we have two other people. We have Tanya Granick-Allen, who really is an outlier. She has not really been involved too much with the PC party. And then we have Doug Ford, who, even though his family does have a lineage in politics, they've never been part of the in-group. They've always been the outliers. They've always been the ones that have been turned away by the leaders themselves. Even though these are exactly the type of people that the regular group person wants, the average Joe like myself wants. Of course, I only speak for myself. So when we're already having these problems, I can't help but feel that this is actually in some way, it's not accidental. I can't help but feel it's intentional. If the PC party, they knew how much of a shit show this was going to be. They knew they had to be on the ball to get everything ready in order to send out their memberships, because it was like a month from when Patrick Brown was stepping down, just over a month from the time he stepped down to when this leadership race was taking place, like when the election was taking place. They knew they had to move fast, and if they didn't prepare properly, then to me it actually looks more like it was deliberate than accidental, like they just couldn't keep up. I'm worried that this is also going to affect the the way that the voting goes, because I'm worried that people like someone like Doug Ford is not going to get all the support that he actually is going to get. A lot of people want him, but not a lot of the establishment politicians want him. I don't want to get too conspiratorial. I don't have any evidence for this, but this is all just seeming too fishy to me. Now, a lot of people have actually said that we have to be worried about the Liberal Party getting involved, that this would be Kathleen Wynne who would hack the vote. But I actually don't believe that. Because right now, hacking the vote and getting somebody in wouldn't do Kathleen Wynne much good. Any one of those candidates can beat her. She needs to play major damage control right now. And in fact, the one thing is I actually think someone like Doug Ford would actually be someone that Kathleen Wynne would prefer, because he would be easier to attack. It wouldn't be quite as easy as attack Christine Elliott or Caroline Mulroney. Not as easy. You attack them as mainstream politicians and having lack of experience, but not much else. At least in Doug Ford, because he's a little more brash, they could point to some of his actions, and then they can use that, put their ideology on top of it, and use it to slander him. So I actually think that Doug Ford would probably, even though he would win over him, hacking this election wouldn't do much to gain Kathleen Wynne some favor in this vote. In fact, it seems to me they would prefer more of a Patrick Brown type character, just for the fact that he was a red Tory. So the one thing about Patrick Brown is he could appeal to more of the both sides of the aisle. He could appeal more to the right, and he could appeal more to the left, because disillusioned liberals could easily turn to the PC conservatives, see Patrick Brown, and he's not too conservative, so they would be willing to jump on with him. Maybe I'm completely wrong, but I think most people like Doug Ford right now because he's completely different. He's not going to be our regular politician. He's going to mix things up, and that could scare the PC leadership. I could easily see that scaring them into trying to fix this election. I don't know. I'm only going completely on speculation, but I can't help and feel that this has been so much of a shit show that it's almost intentional. We'll end up seeing. We still have 2 days left. We'll end up seeing which candidate pulls out and manages to. We'll see which candidate managed to pull out the win. They'll go up against Kathleen Wynne. But if Doug Ford was not to win this, if he was not to win the leader of the PC party, I would like to see him run more as. There are a couple of the other right-wing parties that are out there, the minor parties that split off under Patrick Brown. Maybe he could take leadership of one of those. Maybe he can start up a brand new movement altogether, but I would like to see him still continue on. I think he might be able to pull in the support in order to do so. We'll see. Maybe I'm just being optimistic in that regards. It's just when we're talking about the Conservatives, and now this one's more of a general view of our parties in Canada. I'm strictly speaking about the parties right now, not conservative conservative ideologies or anything, or the right-wing ideologies. I'm strictly talking about the parties in Canada. It seems to me that the party, especially when I look at the federal Conservative Party, they seem weak to me. Lately, the Conservative Party is one that's supposed to stand up for Canada. It's always actually been sort of that way. Yet lately, they've been they're willing to back down on principle. And this is very clear to me through Patrick Brown, through Andrew Scheer. See, I've said before that I like what Scheer does in Question Period, and he did good by going and I think putting in the fundamental ground roots for these trades with India, UK. I think that's good. He's doing a good job there. But he's not a man who stands by his principles, and he's proven that before. I'm not a pro-life person. I've said before that I'm a 7-week pro-choice, because that's when the heart starts beating. However, Andrew Scheer has said himself that even though he is pro-life, he's not willing to open up debate on it again. Not at all. We have no laws surrounding it in Canada. Absolutely no laws. To any point in a pregnancy, there can be an abortion. Now, come on. At some point, you have to admit it is a life. And that's actually why I set mine for 7 weeks, because it's got this between the weeks 6 and 8 is when the heart starts beating. That's the standard of life we judge now, so that's the way I judge the standard of life of beginning. But not long ago, Trump even tried to propose an abortion ban past 20 weeks. Past 20 weeks. That's over the 3-month period. But that's the first trimester, the 3 months, the first trimester. So that's past the first trimester, and that was seen as too extreme. Now, I think more or less people agree that in extreme circumstances, it's acceptable. If the life of the mother, for instance, is on the line, then people are more willing to, or if it happens to be from rape and incest, people are more willing to be lenient in that regards. But people don't want it to turn into a birth control, which is exactly what it has turned into. One stance of some groups of feminism these days is that they're proud that they've had abortions. Lena Dunham herself said that she regrets not getting an abortion in her life. That's a little fucked up. The fact that you can use something like an abortion as a red badge of courage, is that supposed to be brave that you went and got an abortion? Because again, the longer you wait, the farther the pregnancy goes on, the more barbaric of a practice it is. Because at one point, you've got to crush the skull, you've got to break the neck, you've got to rip it out. Sometimes you got to completely cut the fetus in half. Like, it gets barbaric. And Andrew Scheer says he's not willing to open debate on that. So he's showing that he's willing to go back on his morals and his principles in that regards. And there's other things that he's saying he's not willing to do, or that he says he supports and turns his back on. He says he supports free speech, but then he's turned his back before on free speech. A good one was he threw Lynn Bayak out of the caucus when she got in controversial. Now, when she says some controversial shit. The point of free speech, though, is that Andrew Scheer, even if he disagreed and hated that, he should have at least stood up and said, like, we have to respect her right to speak her mind. Now, I'm not defending Lynn Bayak in any way for what she said. I'm simply saying that Andrew Scheer, as the leader of the party, threw her out amongst pressure when he should have stood by his principles. So, are we supposed to actually trust that he is a man that's going to stand by his principles? And the reason I also say that the PC party is weak is because they've allowed left-wing ideology to infect their ranks. Now, one MP that I've spoken about in the past is Michelle Rempel. She is the opposition critic of immigration, and she does a damn good job as the critic of immigration. She does a damn fine job. I like a lot of the work that she's done in Parliament. However, she has definitely, in a lot of ways, dove into the identity politics, I guess the gender politics, that all women are oppressed, and even at times the way she's actually had, I've seen some of the shit she's been sent, it's been pretty nasty. I think she had a stalker one time, so she's gone through some shit without a doubt. But a lot of the way, if you look at the way she acts online, or some of the ways that she interacts with people, it's very much playing gender and identity politics. And that is something that the Conservative Party is supposed to be about. But she's one of the MPs, not solely, but she's one of the MPs that have brought it into the Conservative Party. Understandable. Like, she does good work, and some of her work is completely, absolutely important. Even when it comes to that, she has been one of the main leading charges against female genital mutilation in Canada. That includes both when the practice is committed in Canada, and also those who try and take their children abroad to have it performed and then bring them back to Canada. She is actually one of the leading members who is fighting back against that, and I love that she is. But when she's not doing that, when she's not criticizing our immigration minister for all the stupid fucking policies that he tries to push in, and then she's allowed to express more of her own opinions, there's a lot more identity politics that can come out from her. Her friend Lisa Raitt is a lot of the same way. Now, they do speak about real issues, and they're not nearly as bad as like their liberal counterparts, so they do make some good points. But this is exactly what we're not supposed to be. This is exactly what we're not supposed to be doing on the right wing. We can't let these ideologies infect us. And I mean, when I'm doing this, it's to the point where it's Michelle Rempel will send out a message about women getting involved in politics, and some people are calling her out about, well, you shouldn't play identity politics. She takes it personally and offensively. And then when some people want to point out, what about, I remember one time somebody pointed out, it's like, well, what about the fact that there's a lack of interest in politics? She takes it personally as a shot at women. You shouldn't. If the stats say something, then you've got to accept the stats. If the science says something, you've got to accept the science. And that's what a lot of it says. Because as we've, if we look into the issue, it shows that there's actually a lot of women who show a lack of interest, even in their personal lives, in politics, in the average population. In areas where there are more opportunities, more equal playing ground, less women go into politics. It's very similar to the STEM industry, the science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. And actually, since we're talking about immigration and our Minister of Immigration, you won't hear it on the mainstream media, of course. You have to go online to figure out about this, but many people now are aware of the situation that's been going on in South Africa. And for those who don't know, the situation has gotten pretty fucking bad. Essentially, what has been going on, especially over the last couple years, which is ramped up, I think this 2017 it started ramping up a lot, was that in South Africa, white farmers were being murdered. Their families were being murdered. White farmers were being murdered. Their families were being murdered. Their land was being stolen from them. This has been ramping up for some time and becoming a real problem because in South Africa, the whites are a minor population. Now, there is a giant disparage in the land ownership, they say. And apparently the majority, somehow this minority group who is suppressing them. These just farmers. That's all they are. They're farmers who own their own land, yet they are being seen as somehow suppressing the regular population. I don't know how. I suppose if you went to a far-left progressive, they say, well, that was stolen land, blah, 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 so those white farmers need to get off. Yeah, whatever. The point is these are just regular families that are now have to live in fear. And the stories that are coming out of there are awful. I've seen some of the pictures of some of these attacks, and they are brutal. Nobody is spared. Husbands, wives, children, they're all being murdered. From the pictures that I have seen, which for obvious reasons I'm not going to put them up, but you can go check them out online. They're even available on stuff like Google Images. But if you're willing to stomach it, there are people with their heads smashed in. People that are bullet ridden. There was one story of a family when people went to go at the end after a murder had been taken place, and they went to go investigate. It might have been the police, or maybe this one story I also heard about these two women, that their job is literally they go clean up these murder scenes in these farmers' houses. But anyway, it was either the police or these women that ended up mentioning the story, that there was a family that was murdered. Their house was broken into and murdered. And apparently they were murdered while they were giving their children a bath. One child was drowned, the other one got away, and then they caught up to it, and I believe they slit his throat, and then they gave him the Chelsea's grin, the Joker, cutting up. Yeah, they did that to a child. They murdered the husband and the wife. In many cases, I haven't heard this as much, but I'm guaranteeing you the cases too is that the wives and the young girls are probably being raped by these murderers too. I would not be surprised. And there's plenty other stories very similar to this. One woman talked about her husband actually didn't die from this attack, but she was just inside in their house and she heard a gunshot. When she came running out of the house, some guys were jumping back over their property line, their fence, some black guys, and her husband was lying on the ground with a bullet right in the head. He didn't die from the bullet wound, but he fucked himself up real good. Now, I'm bringing this up because Canada rejected a white South African family from their refugee status. Yeah, that was not a group. One family came to apply for refugee status, and they got rejected. And they told their stories that they were worried that they were actually going to be murdered. Because the other thing I actually just forgot to mention earlier, which is new, it's been announced, is the South African government is now saying that they're going to take the land from the farmers. It's not just going to be these mobs going in and committing these crimes, but now the government's going to come in and take this land from those landowners. These white farmers, and who knows what's going to happen to them. There'll be no compensation. They're simply going to come in, drag you out of your house, and say your land is ours now. That's it. And I'm sure any resistance, and they're going to kill them. I have no doubt in that. But yeah, it says in this article that Eric and Sonia Andre were farmers in South Africa and had been visiting relatives in Canada in April 2016, accompanied by their 2 children and 2 grandparents. 10 days later, they made a refugee claim in which they reference a number of violent thefts and threatening incidents in their home country. Their claim was based on allegations that because they were white, they were being targeted by the black majority. So I should actually specify. So this article that I'm reading from, it actually does go back to September of 2017. So it's not like this just happened, but this is something we've been hearing for some time. And this whole thing that happened with the government has been announced over the last month or so about the South African government. So the situation has just ramped up since this situation took place with Eric and Sonia Andre. That was just one family applying. That was just one. But they got rejected. We were willing to take refugees from all over the world, but from a place where they're actually now being threatened, no, we can't do that. Absolutely not. And there's been some also videos online. I'm going to see if I can find any before I post this, and I'll add it in, of groups of Africans, of African men, that are being encouraged on, it's like huge crowds with a speaker that are being encouraged on to go and murder the white devil. Go murder those farmers. They took your land. Murder them all. kills me, because this is exactly the, like, I have to bring this up. I have to bring this up because the mainstream media won't. And the only people that are talking about this, that really are pretty much alt-righters, white nationalists, and alt-lighters, the Western chauvinist type. I only say alt-lighters because I know Lauren Southern has taken this up, and I know she doesn't identify on the alt-right these days, and I think she identifies as an alt-light. So that's why I would say them. But these are the only people that are talking about it. I'm nowhere close to a white nationalist, and I've got to talk about this because nobody else will except these fringe groups. Nobody ever wants to admit that we never can admit that something like this could actually happen to white people. And why not? It sounds like it's like people will act like you can't happen to white people. Is it wrong? Is it really that wrong to bring this up? To talk about injustices going on regardless of the race? Who cares what the race is? This is just a group of people that are being targeted for no fucking good reason, aside for their skin color. That's it. So fuck whatever race this is, let's talk about it. But in our society these days, if they don't come from the Middle East, or they don't have some sort of noticeable minority, as they're not from some noticeable minority or group, then fuck them. Fuck them. It just upsets me that this could actually be considered controversial. That bringing this up right now could be considered a controversial topic. But it shouldn't matter. It really shouldn't matter, because when we're talking about people murdering another group of people, it doesn't matter what the group is. We just gotta focus on it and make it stop. Now, I don't know what we really can do. There's not really much we can do, but if we're having some refugees from a real refugee place, come on. You know what? How many economic migrants did we let in during the 2015 crisis? In fact, I heard that most of those 25,000 Syrian refugees that Trudeau brought in didn't even come from refugee camps. They actually were already settled in the area, in places like Jordan. But they were then, or maybe Turkey, but then they were uprooted and sent to Canada. So Trudeau didn't even bring on real fucking refugees. A lot of them that came over were actually already settled, yet were moved again. And we can't bring in one refugee family. Nobody's going to do anything. Nobody wants to help them if nobody's going to recognize this. None of our federal MPs are willing to recognize this. I have not heard one of our conservative MPs bring this up, or any of the other sorts. And this is why I also say that the conservatives this is also why I'm talking about that the Conservative Party are cowards right now. That the people in there are cowards. Because they're actually afraid. I'm sure they're afraid to even bring this up at all. So, what's the similarity between Antifa and a giant piece of shit? No matter where you go, they always smell. Antifa had to make their presence known in both Canada and the UK over the last little bit. These little anarchist pieces of shit, these little fucking pathetic pieces of shit. First off, probably the more well-known one is what happened in UK. And that was as Sargon of Akkad was doing a talk at a university, and then suddenly Antifa busted in using smoke bombs and making noise as they usually do, and we've got a video right here. So that right there, what's going on, as you can see, that was just that was a loser situation for Antifa. They came in trying to shut them down, claiming them to be alt-right and that they were Nazis, yada yada. Their usual talking points. You know what they like to say. Anybody that's even remotely right to them is considered a fascist, including liberals. Ironically enough, they're more fascist. But this was a loss for them because, as you can see in one incident there, that Buddy in the red hat ends up getting taken down. This was just from people from the crowd who ended up getting involved. And I'm not really somebody who supports violence or anything like that, but fuck them. They came in, they were the one, and again, actually, technically, that red hat, as you can tell from the audio that ended up happening, the guy in the red hat made the push first. So, you know what? Fuck them. In that situation, fuck them. But this was a loss because they easily got forced out, and then Sargon of Akkad ended up taking their flag. And he ended up putting out a video in which the flag was sitting right behind him. It's his war trophy. He may actually do more streams and more videos in the future of him from there with that right behind him. I'm sure he will. It's going to piss off Antifa to see him have it. And you know what? We can criticize Sargon a lot for what he's done in 2018. The liberalist movement, it's gotten very cringy already. And I don't think he really knows what direction he's taking that group in, and I don't even see the point. They're supposed to be like spread liberalism, the core value of liberalism. Like, I don't get it. I honestly don't get the liberalists. I don't at all. But hey, you know what? For the most part, I actually enjoy his content for entertainment purposes. This Week in Stupid, I still watch it and everything like that. And he is still taking on the far left Antifa, the SJWs. So, fuck it. You know what? I'm glad to see that he got a win out of this. But, so that was what went on in the UK. But then recently, Antifa has been popping up in it was a few days ago, I believe it was on March 4th, Antifa popped up in Hamilton. 30 masked members ended up going down the streets in Hamilton, and they ended up causing $100,000 worth of damage. And, you know, it's obviously Antifa. They're sporting the regular clothing, all black, the masks, and they have their signs, become ungovernable, or we're ungovernable, blah, 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 whatever their bullshit is. They're a fucking joke. And so this was on Locke Street. And after this ended up happening, within a day or two of this ended up happening, there was retaliation. Because somebody broke into it was their well-known meeting spot, the Tower. And they ended up vandalizing the whole place, trashing it and everything like that. Now, they claim it's a far-right group that did this. I don't know if that's true for certain. It could have been just a number of pissed-off local people. It just may have been the pissed-off local people that came and decided to get a little bit of revenge on the people who went down and destroyed their shops and caused $100,000 worth of damage. And what I couldn't believe out of this is that there has been no charges laid in this. None at all. What the fuck? So we're almost encouraging Antifa at this point. Our government encourages Antifa. Our local police encourages Antifa when they don't do anything about it. When people are going around and busting up windows and they're masked, that is a perfect reason to start arresting them. And it's not like we've seen in some other regards. It's not like we've seen in other places like, was it Germany? I think it was Germany, the G20, just this past year, where they had fucking some 5,000-6,000 people show up. It's not quite like that. These were 30 people. Divide and conquer, people. It's not that hard. And this is what the police are supposed to be here to do. I support the police, but Jesus Christ, do your fucking job. You're supposed to keep the city safe. You're supposed to stop mass lawlessness like this. But now our government is almost encouraging Antifa, simply by not doing anything. Simply by allowing them to roam, by allowing them to go out and not have any consequences for their actions. They're going to do this again. Why wouldn't they? But if this was an alt-right event, or even a remotely conservative event, like a free speech event, then this would have been shut down so fucking fast. So fucking fast if there was any sort of this violence. The thing is, too, is I don't know about the rest of you. I didn't particularly really hear about this overall from the mainstream media over the last couple of days. I can't really say that I saw an article that stood out to me as being a big deal from like places such as CBC or Global. Maybe I just missed it and I didn't see them at the right time, but honestly, nothing. The reason I actually came across this is because I went looking for something to do with a different story. See, I came across something on Twitter, which is a story I can't confirm. I can't confirm because I've only seen this as being the... I've only seen... you know what, I gotta go to my profile before I can show it to you. I've only seen this as the only source. It's on Twitter, so you can't take it at face value until there's more to back it up. But anyway, Dundas is a small area in Hamilton. Here it is. So when was this tweet put out? The tweet was put out on March 6th. So this event was supposedly took place on March 5th, and it took place on March 5th. So what it says, it was tweeted out, and it wasn't even from, it's from a woman I follow, but she was quoting this, and I don't see a source, so that's also the problem that about why I can't figure out where this goes back to, where this originated from. But it says, my partner and I were surrounded and attacked by a dozen Muslim scum last night. They threatened to kill our whole family. When they had me surrounded, my partner ran in to get a weapon. I told them to put it away and call the police. Not only did they not care we were assaulted, they called CAS on me and made the father of my children leave our home. They actually have the nerve to say I need to allow them to investigate and assess if he can be around our children. Kept us up from 2 a.m. to 6 with this BS. I've never been so angry in my life. And the woman who retweeted it, she ended up saying, this happened last night in Dundas, Ontario, just outside Hamilton. Not the first attack of its kind in the area. So I was actually looking to go and try and confirm this story when I came across everything that was happening with Antifa. And the reason I wanted to confirm that is because that's a very similar story to what we were hearing going on in other places, such as in Europe, in the UK, in France, in Germany. Groups of Muslim men that were then attacking individuals or couples. And then it didn't seem like they even did much necessarily aside for beat the shit out of them. And I think this was for intimidation purposes. Obviously intimidation purposes. And just overall lawlessness and disrespect. But if that was true, then that has started happening in Canada. And what also shocked me about that was the woman who put it out. She said that it was not the first kind of its area. Now, I cannot confirm any part of this story because I couldn't really find a newspaper article or something in the area saying that there was something in the area saying that this sort of attack was taking place a lot of times. But one thing I was considering is perhaps, I don't know, they make no references to black masked thugs, but I almost was wondering whether this was Antifa members, because this was right around the same time this took place. I was wondering if it was quite possible that these were Antifa thugs that she mistook for maybe perhaps Muslims instead. I don't know. I'm just speculating. I have no confirmation that this story is true or false. But but the real reason I just told you that was because that's how I came across this Antifa story that I had not heard about over the last few days. So if any of you were aware of it, if the mainstream media did actually talk about it, then okay, but I have not seen any of it whatsoever. And it's not like there's been much follow-up from the news about this. It's not like the news is really talking about an investigation that is taking place after. In the meantime, I think I'm going to keep my eyes open, and I'm going to keep my eyes and ears open for these other form of attacks. Because if these sort of attacks are starting to come onto our soil, then we need to do something about this now. Now, when I saw this tweet, I retweeted and just put my opinion forth before I even really considered the validity of the story, of how true it is or how false. And if this is actually the treatment that this woman, if this story was true and she was attacked and then she called the police and then the CAS is trying to take her kids away or investigate her kids and her father for trying to defend themselves. If that story is true, then we've reached a point where we need some sort of civilian defense force. We've reached the point where we need to stand up for ourselves, because if this is true and the cops aren't going to do anything about it, and in fact there is a danger of yourself getting in trouble simply for defending your home or your family, then we can't rely on the government anymore. We can't rely on any form of the government, and that would also mean for protection in the form of police. Now, I would never say go against the police, fight back against the police. Not at all. I am not saying anything remotely close to that. But we need some sort of organization that the point is to patrol the streets, to keep people safe, to keep the local neighborhood safe, if this is where the point we're getting at. And as we've seen from other sources in other countries, there's really, when these sort of things happen, there's really not, there is never stories being talked about it. You always have to go to the alternate sources, whether that's Twitter, Gab, or any of the other social media platforms, Facebook, this, that, or the other, for however long that they still work and don't censor us. So, if that story is true and something like that is true, then without a doubt, there have been a lot more that have taken place that we have not heard about, which means that this problem is already underway and we need to get a handle on it now. I think that's where I'm going to put my focus on my next episode. I think I'm going to start investigating and see if I can find any evidence of these sort of attacks taking place. If I do, I'll report on them. But in the meantime, I want to thank you for joining me on the podcast today. My name's Adrian Lloyd. This is just my stupid opinion. I'll see you all soon.